Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really diving into a big one, Doom, the Dark Ages.
Yeah, generated a lot of talk, this one.
For sure, we've got a pile of sources here, reviews, analyses, looks at the mechanics, and our mission really is to boil it all down. What makes this Doom tick differently? And, should you be playing it?
And it is different, isn't it? Like, you hear Doom, you think speed, constant motion.
Exactly.
And now it's medieval.
Yeah.
And focusing on, well, maybe not moving quite so much with this big shield.
Right. And that Game Pass launch on day one that threw it right out there to potentially millions.
That whole mix, yeah, it definitely makes you curious.
Absolutely. So let's get the lay of the land first. Looking across the sources, what's the overall reception? How did it land?
Well, the consensus seems really strong. Pretty positive across the board. It got, critical acclaim, generally favorable on Metacritic.
Okay.
And you see scores like 90 out of 100, 80%, 9 out of 10. Words like action-packed, cinematic, glorious are popping up a lot.
Glorious. Huh. That's strong. What about the players? The community?
Seems like they were largely on board too. Sources were saying the community reaction was really positive, calling it like one of the best single-player shooters of the year.
Wow, right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's a big statement.
And that looks back to Game Pass. That day one thing feels like it really shaped how many people got their hands on it immediately.
Oh, absolutely. Launching straight onto Xbox Series X and S and PC Game Pass. That wasn't just, how they sold it. It was significant.
Right.
Sources pointed to this huge immediate splash, over 3 million players just in the first week.
3 million. Wow.
Yeah, and it's a classic Game Pass story, right? Maybe the direct Steam sales look a bit lower than, say, Doom Eternal initially, but player count, massive. It
Right.
shows how Game Pass just floods the zone with players.
So for you, the listener, that access through Game Pass is a big piece of why sources are saying, yeah, you should probably play this.
Definitely a major factor in that must-play argument right at launch.
Okay, so critical hit, player hit. Now the big one, how does it actually play? Doom Eternal was just relentless speed, that complex resource loop. How does Dark Ages change things up?
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting. The sources often frame this one as a kind of deliberate, well, maybe evolution, or even a response to Eternal.
A response how?
Well, Eternal was huge, obviously, but its speed, its complexity, it did kind of push some players away, right? It felt maybe a bit much.
Sure, I can see that.
So this game, according to the reviews, it tries to reinvent and rein in at the same time, takes a new direction, but doesn't, totally ditch what makes Doom, Doom.
Wow.
One source described it nicely as threading the needle, trying to bring back that core engrossing power fantasy, but maybe with mechanics that feel a little simpler, more intuitive,
Right.
but still really satisfying.
Simpler path to the power fantasy, okay. And you mentioned standing your ground. That sounds weird for Doom. How does that work?
That's probably the biggest mechanical change people are talking about. Previous games were all about zipping around, flying over enemies.
Total air control.
Right. Dark Ages, though, it puts a real emphasis, almost makes it central to planting your feet right in the middle of the fight sometimes. You're still moving, obviously, but the core loop feels different.
Does that make it feel slow? Standing still with demons everywhere sounds like a death sentence in Doom.
See, that's what the sources were really careful about. They call the combat brutal, for sure. And yeah, it's slower paced than Eternal, more melee focused.
Okay.
It's going for that more grounded and visceral feeling. But, and this is the key thing, they all pushed back hard on calling it actually slow.
Okay.
Like, it's noticeably slower than Eternal, yes, but it's absolutely not a slow game. It still feels frenetic, just a different kind of frenetic. Tuned perfectly for the new tools you've got. It's a new rhythm.
And the main tool, driving that new rhythm, the thing enabling this whole shift,
Yeah.
that's got to be the shield, right? That sounds like it's way more than just a block button.
Oh, the shield is everything. It's the star of the show, really. You've got it out all the time, and it dictates the whole dance.
So blocking, obviously.
Yeah, it blocks damage. That's the basic bit. But where it gets really interesting is the offense and the reaction stuff. You do timed blocks, parries, basically.
Against specific attacks.
Yeah, often ones that glow neon green, the sources mentioned. And when you parry, you don't just stop the damage, you send it right back. Big damage.
So it's an offensive weapon right there.
Totally. And it literally is an offensive weapon, too. It's got chainsaw edges
Yeah.
for slicing.
Chainsaw shield. Of course.
You can throw it Captain America style, bounces between enemies. It's designed specifically to break armor, especially the superheated kind that glows coral.
Uh-huh.
And crucially, it replaces Eternal's air dash. Instead, you get this long-range shield bash. It locks onto enemies way across the arena
Oh, wow.
and just launches you at them, like a virtual teleport, one force called it. You just appear in their face, ready to smash them.
A boomerang chainsaw teleport shield.
You got it.
And it interacts with the world, too.
Exactly. That's part of it. You use it for puzzles, getting around. If you see hot metal stuff, glowing coral chains, doors, you can hit it with a shield, cut things, trigger stuff, drop crates on enemies.
Nice.
And yeah, you throw it, it zips right back to you. Very Thor.
I think I saw one source use a bowling analogy.
Yeah.
Seemed kind of funny.
They did. Yeah. They're talking about lining up a bunch of those hot, glowy enemies and hitting them with the bash or a bounce. Just wham.
Like a strike.
Exactly like a strike. They said it feels super satisfying. You even get this little cash register chime sound. It's all about that immediate, crunchy feedback.
That's so different from how shields usually work in games, right? Like, think Dark Souls or Bloodborne. A shield is about being careful.
That's the key insight everyone seemed to have about this shield. It's not defensive in that cautious way. It's accelerative.
Accelerative? How?
Well, parrying attacks actually speeds up when you can counterattack. The bash isn't just moving, it's starting the fight aggressively. Throwing it deals damage while you do other things. It's all attack all the time, as one review put it. You feel powerful not because you're hiding, but because the shield lets you keep pushing forward relentlessly. Blocking is like the least interesting thing it does.
Okay, that makes the shift away from Eternal's resource juggling make more sense then. It's less about ammo and health pickups, more about this parry and melee flow.
Exactly. They deliberately dialed back the resource management compared to Eternal. The focus is now this new rhythm, balancing your big melee hits, which often have cooldowns, with landing parries to shorten those cooldowns.
Right.
Sources describe getting into this really satisfying loop. Bam! Shield bash in, parry, parry. Then unleash hell while the demons staggered. That bone-crunching sequence.
And that crunchy feel they talked about, that comes from this.
Yeah, that tactile feedback. The game apparently pauses for like a microsecond on big impacts just to emphasize the weight of it all. Gives it that crunch.
Nice.
And it adds to the Slayer feeling more physical, more grounded. When he lands from a jump, it's this earth-shaking thud that just turns nearby weak enemies into paste. Like a violent superhero landing, you feel like this massive presence.
Which links back to the movement changes, no double jump, no air dash, like in Eternal.
Exactly. That was a conscious choice, the sources noted. It really reinforces that stand your ground, grounded feeling. You're still mobile with the bash and just running around, but you're not doing the crazy aerial stuff. It commits to the new feel.
So heavier Slayer, amazing shield, strong melee, but it's still Doom. There've got to be guns, big guns, even with the medieval theme.
Oh, absolutely. The guns are still there. Classics like the Super Shotgun are back. And actually, sources said it feels even better here because the whole game pushes you to get close anyway. So that close-range blast feels more integrated.
Makes sense. What about the new stuff? Medieval guns, how does that even work?
That's where they seem to have a lot of fun. There's like a railgun equivalent.
Yeah.
But it fires a cannonball on a chain. Apparently just wrecks armored guys. And then there's a Gatling gun that chews up skulls and spits out bone fragments as bullets.
Seriously, bone bullets.
Yep, sounds pretty metal. Go for crowds, apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, sources confirmed there's a vast array of full armory, rocket launchers, laser weapons. The usual suspects are there in some form. And classic Doom style, no reloading.
Always appreciated. What about the BFG? Did they mess with the BFG?
It's back. But yeah, apparently reinvented. Sources were kind of cagey about the details, basically saying it's so cool in its new form, you just have to see it for yourself. Teases.
Okay, fair enough. So moving beyond the combat itself, the levels, is it still just, corridor, arena?
Seems like there's a change there, too. Sources talked about bigger, more open levels, described them as hubs or battlefields.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, apparently these hubs have multiple objectives, secrets, challenges. You can kind of choose your path, tackle things in a different order, more freedom. They also mentioned some cool new settings, like a cosmic realm, apparently draws on Lovecraftian stuff for some memorable side areas. Bit unsettling, maybe?
So not just castles and hellscapes.
Right. But the sources also made clear it's not all open hubs. The campaign, which is long, like 22 chapters, mixes these open areas with more traditional linear paths. Keeps it varied.
And plenty of demons to fight in these hubs, not just empty space.
Oh yeah, they're apparently filled with battalions of demons. Constant fights, but supposedly balanced well so it doesn't just become a slog.
And for the secret hunters out there.
They should be happy. Games reportedly stuffed with secrets.
Nice.
And they mentioned some neat old school touches too, like finding blue keys and red keys, kind of like Gauntlet, or following gold trails or markers to figure out environmental puzzles, almost like a really violent Mario game.
Huh? Violent Mario guiding you through hell.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, but even great games stumble sometimes. Where did the sources say Dark Ages, maybe? Falters a bit.
Yeah, there's a pretty consistent point of criticism, it seems to be, when the game moves away from that core on-foot combat loop.
Like what?
Specifically the giant mech sections and the parts where you're riding a dragon.
Ah, okay. Vehicle sections, basically. Why didn't those land as well?
The feeling was they just lacked depth. They felt kind of tacked on, maybe. Ripped out of an entirely different game was one phrase used. Compared to the main combat, these bits were described as slow, drawn-out fights, just not as engaging. Apparently, playing them mostly just made reviewers want to get back to being the Slayer on foot, with the shield and guns.
Yeah, I can see that. Stick to what works.
Someone just called them a bore, flat out. It kind of highlights how good the main loop is when the deviations feel like a step down.
Right. Noted. Stick to the ripping and tearing on foot.
Yeah?
What about story? Tone. Doom isn't exactly known for its Shakespearean plots. True. There is more cinematic storytelling this time, apparently. Sources said it was easier to follow who's who and what's happening compared to just reading codex entries like in the older games.
Okay, so more front.
Yeah, but even with that, the story itself wasn't hailed as, like, super captivating or anything. Fine, sets up the ancient war premise, but doesn't really answer big questions about the Slayer. And the tone felt closer to eternal seriousness than the sort of dark humor of the 2016 reboot.
Any bright spots in the narrative, though?
They did mention some standout moments, usually when the game takes some unexpected liberties with the Slayer's character, maybe little bits of dark humor sneak in. Apparently these moments called back to the best bits of 2016 without getting tangled in lore.
Okay, and the overall tone.
Yeah.
Because Dune equals gore, intensity. Right.
This was maybe the most surprising thing that kept coming up across different sources, despite all the blood and guts.
Yeah.
The overall feeling was described as almost like a lark, like finely crafted silliness and fun.
Silliness in Dune.
Yeah. Words like wholesome and knockabout were used, which sounds weird, right, compared to what you'd expect. One source said it felt like being in a wild cartoon writer's room. Even the demons were described as having a sort of proggish charm. It creates this weird contrast. A game about brutally murdering demons that somehow feels innocent or even lovely compared to, say, the vibe of some other modern games.
That's unexpected. Wholesome demon slaying.
One reviewer even compared it favorably to something like Roblox from a parent's perspective, just highlighting how different the feel is despite the violence. It's not trying to be grimdark and edgy in the same way, maybe.
That's a fascinating take.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, any quick hits on tech stuff? Performance, accessibility.
Yeah, tech-wise, sounds very solid. Locked 60 FPS on Series X, reportedly very stable, runs great on decent PCs.
Good, new engine, right?
Yep, iTech 8. Supports ray tracing, destructible environments, all that good stuff, and they already patched it post-launch to make Nightmare difficulty harder based on feedback, so they're tweaking it. Accessibility sounds pretty comprehensive too. Toggles for camera shake, weapon bob, UI color options, auto sprint, auto weapon switch, high contrast mode, remappable controls, colorblind modes, the works, basically.
Great to hear. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We've got the rave reviews, the massive Game Pass launch, this big shift to grounded, shield-heavy combat, the adapted guns, the open levels, those slightly iffy vehicle bits, and this surprisingly fun tone. What's the final picture? What is Doom? The Dark Ages.
I think based on everything we've read, it's Doom successfully reinventing itself again. It's heavier, more grounded, absolutely centered on that shield, but it pulls off the trick of still feeling like Doom.
Still got that energy.
Exactly. It finds that frenetic pace, but through a new rhythm, parries, melee, using the shield aggressively. The sources mostly agree it's this really finely tuned adventure. It blends the classic stuff with the new medieval flavor really well, both in weapons and levels. It delivers that core power fantasy of being unstoppable.
Right.
But in a way that feels fresh and compelling. It's complex enough to be engaging, but maybe not overwhelming in the way Eternal could be for some.
Mm-hmm.
The reception, the accessibility, it seems like they really nailed the landing on this one.
Sounds like they found a genuinely new direction for the Slayer, which is impressive this far into a series.
Yeah.
And the part leaves us with a final thought, maybe for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah.
How does a series that basically defined itself by pushing speed and movement to the absolute limit, managed to find this new wave of success by, well, slowing things down a bit and by making a shield, of all things, usually a defensive tool, the absolute core of its offense.
It is a paradox, isn't it?
Or maybe consider this. What does it say about where games are at today? That a title packed with grotesque demons and hyper-violence can end up being described by multiple sources as feeling surprisingly wholesome, or innocent even, compared to other things out there. Strange times.
Definitely something interesting to think about.
And that's our deep dive into Doom, the Dark Ages.